Hello everybody and welcome to Parks Bros. It's Drew here and we're back for our first day of Listmas in 2024, starting off with a top 10 countdown of my favorite themed amusement parks I've been to. That's right, Listmas is officially back starting now through the end of this year. And if you don't know what that is, it is a series of videos that counts down my top 10s in theme parks all around at least the US as of now, whether it be for certain elements on coasters, dark rides, or heck, even my favorite trash cans. There's eventually going to be a list for everything, and it all ends up leading to a countdown of my top coasters. Now this year we're starting off with something that a lot of people have asked me about over the years, and I always thought it would be kind of unfair to rank parks as a whole. There's so many changing factors when it comes to talking about these places in comparison to rides, of course, that can make the best park seem like a terrible one or a not so great park ending up being one of your favorite visits of all time. So I really struggled with the idea of properly putting these parks into a list, because to be honest, I feel like certain parks kind of get unfair treatment within it, and some parks might even be a little bit overrepresented. Now, some caveats are included in this list, just so you know. I will not be including any of my home parks, or realistically in my case, any parks in Southern California. This includes Disneyland, California Adventure, Knott's Berry Farm, Six Flags Magic Mountain, Universal Studios Hollywood, and SeaWorld San Diego, as well as a couple of the other smaller parks in the region, as I feel it'd be really unfair to put these parks into this ranking. As for some of them, I've visited them in the hundreds of times, giving so many different experiences through each one, making it extremely complicated to put it anywhere on this list. So all the parks I'll be talking about today, at most, I've spent maybe 8 or 9 days at total. And at the lowest, I've visited some of these parks for only a day or even a handful of hours. But that's enough rambling from me. Let's head into the top 10 parks I've ever visited out of around 30. At number 10, we're going to be heading to San Antonio, Texas for Six Flags Fiesta, Texas, the only Six Flags park I've actually visited in Texas thus far. Hopefully that changes soon. But I sadly have not been to this park since 2020, and there's been a lot of change that actually could bump this park a lot higher. And if you know anything about this park, you know it has some amazing RMC coasters like Iron Rattler and Wonder Woman, and there's something that a lot of these regional amusement parks don't seem to have at this park in abundance, and that's a lot of charm. There's some pretty subtle theming throughout the entire park, as well as some more in-depth theming in certain areas, and I think it does a really good job of reflecting Texas as a whole, and then adding some not-so-Texan themes throughout, like of course the DC universe, and the kind of newer re-themed area that takes more of a steampunk vibe. I will say the only reason I think this park is not higher on this list at this time was in my previous visits, operations were not so great, more specifically in their rides department, with dispatch times as well as train usage being on the lower end of things, as well as the food at the park is not necessarily my favorite, but the rides are absolutely phenomenal. The theming in a lot of areas is incredible, as I already mentioned. But something I haven't mentioned yet is that incredible setting. Being inside an old quarry is insane. And another big positive to this park is they usually go all out for their different events, especially Fright Fest. But those are all reasons that it definitely deserves to be in my top 10. At number 9 is a park I haven't been to in a couple years yet again. That's going to be, unfortunately, a common thing on this list, but it's SeaWorld Orlando in Orlando, Florida. This park is not necessarily my favorite of the 3 SeaWorld parks I've been to, but in terms of rides especially, it offers the most. It is pretty easily at this point the roller coaster capital of Orlando. I know that's their new catchphrase, but it's oh so true. Heck, the last time I visited was right when Icebreaker was in previews, and they've added 2 new B&M roller coasters since then. The park also, while lighter in theming, is just genuinely naturally pretty all around, with even some of the more sparse areas just looking really clean and nice. And of course, like every SeaWorld park, there is the added bonus of having a bunch of animal exhibits and shows that really add to the overall experience of visiting this park. Some Some of the negatives of the park, though, do seem to be the food options, at least in my experience, as well as, again, ride operations. That's going to be kind of a common thing. But a not so common thing is a very confusing park layout, and this, like most of the SeaWorld parks, has a very confusing park layout. Not that that's necessarily a negative or a positive, just something to keep in mind. But I will easily say this is the party park in Orlando. If you want to have a fun time with some incredible seasonal events and shows, this is where you want to go. Next up at number 8 is probably where I'm going to ruffle the most feathers. This park, especially by roller coaster enthusiasts, is considered the capital, which means we're going to Sandusky, Ohio for Cedar Point. This park is on a peninsula in the middle of Lake Erie and offers some incredible views all around, with the entire resort actually including a beach and a water park. That's all without mentioning that this park actually has more attractions than just about any other in the entire world, as well as on average one of the best coaster lineups out there, including of course the incredible Steel Vengeance, Maverick, Magnum XL200, and Millennium Force. All of these rides and more are completely noteworthy in the history books and still give so many amazing rides to this day. Genuinely, this place has some of my favorite rides of all time, even if they're not high up there on my list overall. Man, oh man, if any of them is closing, I'm flying out to Ohio ASAP. There's some really nice theming, especially towards the back of the park, and at least in my visits, there seemed to be more entertainment when I was there compared to currently, which wasn't necessarily a whole lot, but it was still nice to see. I will mention before getting into the negatives that I have visited this park more than any other on this list with the exception of one, and I've got quite the mixed bag of an experience. Something we've run into more frequently than not, though, is inconsistencies in operations of the rides as well as food, with a lot of miscommunications on a guest side of things especially. And even on our last visit to the park, which was multiple years after our first, only one or two of the over dozen roller coasters operating for the first 3 to 4 hours of the day. But I think my biggest issues with the park are really in the food and its quality and lack of shade towards the front of the park. But this is still, I think, a park you need to visit if you're a roller coaster or theme park enthusiast, because there's just so many iconic attractions there, and truly you'll get an experience you won't forget. Hopping back down to Florida for number 7 is Universal Studios Florida. This is technically the flagship park of the Universal Orlando Resort, with it being the first of currently 3 and soon to be 4 open. It features a handful of roller coasters as well as plenty of dark and simulation rides, with some of the truly noteworthy areas including Minions Land, Springfield, and Diagon Alley. I know, right? What a weird combination of different themed lands, but that's kind of what you get with these main Universal parks. Studios Hollywood does the same thing, and in terms of its theming, it's not exactly cohesive everywhere as you're supposed to be on a movie lot. But in this park especially, it feels like there's a lot of hit and a lot of miss. You have some of the best attractions of all time, including Gringotts and The Mummy. But then you also have rides like Minion Mayhem, Jimmy Fallon's Race from New York, and, of course, Fast and Furious Supercharged. I feel like this would be less of a worry if there was more standard dark rides instead of the typical simulators that they have, as well as just more rides overall. There seems to be pretty big gaps in the park that don't seem to have any real attractions, but then again, I will say that those parts of the park are some of my favorite, as they're just super relaxing and really scenic. But with all that said, this park has some of the best that theme parks have to offer overall. They have some really solid food, incredible ride operations, and did I mention Diagon Alley? I mean, that is one of the most amazing lands in a park out there. But unfortunately, especially compared to the other Universal parks, I feel like it's just missing that special spark, maybe a little bit of cohesion that would really bump it up that next notch. Heading up to northern Idaho for number 6. I know that's probably not something you expected to hear, but we're going to Silverwood, which is a smaller family-owned and operated park that realistically has no right to be this high up on the list. But man, I gotta tell ya, the absolute charm that this park had all around was undeniable. The railroad that took us out into the middle of the woods and actually had us meet Bigfoot. The small western town that the train actually went right through. Giant picnic areas for people to eat their lunch, and even stations themed to look like it's in the middle of an earthquake. There was just something incredibly charming that tugged at my heartstrings when I was was here for a day in 2021. And while it was a really crowded day at the park, that led to one of my least favorite parts of this park, and that is the fact that most of the coasters ran with one train, which led to some pretty excessive wait times. And while they were quick to get that train back out again, some of the waits were truly excruciating. But speaking of the coasters, there are actually a lot of really great ones. Unfortunately, one that I missed was Aftershock. It was 1 degree too cold to run it. I kid you not. So I still have not been on a Vekoma giant inverting boomerang, but I've now been on the original Arrow corkscrew, which used to be at Knott's Berry Farm, so that was a cool thing to hit off the bucket list, as well as an RMC Raptor is at that park, and 2 honestly noteworthy wooden coasters. Don't get me wrong, it looks like this park hasn't changed much in the past 30 or 40 years, but it's maintained to keep that same feel that it had back then. Something I feel that is not that easy to do at a theme park. Oh yeah, and can I mention, the food was incredible. And I know it's way out of the way for most people, but if you find yourself in that area, I highly recommend it. Up next is number 5, and number 5 for me, honestly, doesn't necessarily fit on this list at all, but I had to include it in some way. This is a water park. It is the only water park that's on this list. It's Volcano Bay at the Universal Orlando Resort. This was the 3rd of the properties to open at that resort, and it is exclusively a water park. So there's only water slides, tube slides, pools, wave pools, and all of the regular things you see at water parks. But it's extremely themed everywhere. You can walk underneath and through a volcano, and pretty much everywhere you walk, there's even misters to cool down your feet and make sure you don't burn them on the concrete. Like, come on, that's insane. This park also features some of the best water slides out there and an incredible aqua coaster, which is just unbelievable, especially if you're sitting towards the front. That ride is purely ejector airtime and nothing else. And with the food being really, really well-rounded, I genuinely, if I lived in the Orlando area, would go to that park almost every single day just to relax in one of the quieter areas of the park. Oh, and then maybe I'd hop on one of my favorite attractions of all time, the Fearless River, which is pretty much a lazy river, but with a wave machine too. So you're just getting thrown all around while you're going through the river, and it actually ends up being kind of a workout too. My only gripes with this park, honestly, are some of the ways they use the tapu tapu system. So realistically, you have this armband when you enter the park, and you tap it against rides you'd like to ride, and from there it will give you an approximate wait time for you to go do other things. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this is a great system in theory, and it allows you to do a bunch of other things while you virtually wait for a slide. But sometimes it ends up with certain slides not being able to be ridden on busier days because the virtual queue extends past the park's closing time, or it makes you cancel your wait time if you want to go hop on a slide with 0 wait. It's really great if you want photos of yourself around the park, but I feel like it adds a lot of unnecessary pre-planning, especially at a park that is all about relaxation. And then there's one other tiny little bummer, and that's that the park does not seem to stay open past the sun going down, which in my mind is an absolute tragedy, especially seeing how many light fixtures are all around the park. And with the heated rivers and pools and slides, I wish they'd keep it open that extra 3, maybe even 4 hours. Up next at number 4 is another park in Florida. However, it's about an hour and a half away in Tampa, as we're heading to Busch Gardens, Tampa. While SeaWorld Orlando might be the coaster capital of Orlando, I think this is truly the coaster capital of all of Florida, as it has some pretty major ones: Montu, Shikra, Iron Gwazi. And while the park has changed a lot since I last visited in 2022, all of my visits to that park were really, really good. There is consistent and really thoughtful theming all over the park. And something else this park excels in is, of course, a bunch of animal exhibits, and heck, you can even ride the train and go through a safari. So even if you're not into coasters, there's still a ton of stuff to do, and it's a great place to walk around. And while yes, it does stick to that SeaWorld trope of having a confusing layout, it's actually a little bit easier if you think about it as a big circle. This park just does a really great job of doing that mid to high level theming all over, while still offering some extreme thrills as well as some family thrills, and of course even going down further into the family coasters with tons of other flat rides to check out for all ages. I feel like this park truly is the bridge bridge between theme and amusement park, and it kind of takes the best of both worlds for it. Unfortunately, I've only visited twice, but I will say my biggest gripe with the park, at least when I was there, was the food. It wasn't the greatest, and in SeaWorld style, it was pretty expensive. But honestly, that was my only real complaint outside of some of the locker systems currently in place, where there are certain rides that we ended up having to rent a locker for. But I will say we had a better experience there than somewhere like SeaWorld San Diego. And while yes, it's pretty far from the rest of Orlando, I highly recommend checking it out. It's definitely one of the parks I missed the most. In our top 3, we're heading back to Ohio, believe it or not, for Kings Island in Mason, Ohio. If you told me this park was going to be this high up on this list when I first visited, I would have been like, you're crazy. But this park is truly what I think of when I think classic amusement park that's still around. While yes, this place has changed a lot over the past decades, it still has honored a lot of that past while still keeping that genuine summer night vibe. There's not too much theming all around, I will admit that, but my goodness, this place is just really pretty to look at. All of the buildings had their own unique flair and subtle hints at what they were trying to show. This is all without mentioning that this park is home to Orion, Banshee, and of course, the Beast, which are all stellar roller coasters, and that's only the top 3 there, with other rides like Mystic Timbers, the Bat, and plenty of other flat rides too, which make the ride lineup seem fully fleshed out. Going to some negatives real quick, I will say there's not really any shade or theme to most of the left-hand side of the park, which is kind of unfortunate, and specifically in front of Banshee is where I'm talking about, as well as over towards Vertigo. But places like Area 72 or in front of Area 72, all of that I'm totally okay with, especially that area in front, as it just screams classic amusement park with all of the brickwork and the flashing lights above the dodgems and other flat rides, as well as the carnival games. Something this park was really good at though was food. Almost every meal we had was incredible, and they truly excelled at ride operations, specifically dispatch times. Bringing back Mystic Timbers real quick, that was truly the standout ride. There were 25-second to 30-second dispatches consistently on that ride. So even though the line might look a little bit longer, we still at max waited 10 minutes. And unfortunately, because of this park, I feel even more spoiled after visiting it, because there are other parks in the same chain or chains adjacent to it that just for some reason or another can't quite get to that level of quickness, even with the same amount of people working the rides or more. But yeah, Kings Island is one of those parks that I absolutely cannot wait to get back to, especially with some of the new changes that have just appeared at the park too. And that's all without mentioning some of the best entertainment I've ever seen at a park. There were shows or parades happening constantly all over. And of course, every night as the park was closing, there was one of the best firework and drone shows I've ever seen, with the Eiffel Tower in the center being illuminated with lasers, as this park truly put on a Disney-level performance and stunned the heck out of me. At our number 2 spot, we're heading back down to Florida to my most visited of these 10 parks, as we head to Islands of Adventure, the second of the 3 Universal properties that truly overshadows its next door neighbor in Universal Studios Florida. This park shows what Universal can do when they just go crazy, as this is genuinely one of the best parks in the world, with some of the most immaculate theming, operations, and food. When you first walk through the gates, you get this chill in your body that's just unmistakable. It feels like a bunch of joy and wonder is entering your system, as port of entry is easily one of the best entryways I've ever experienced. Looking out over the lagoon and seeing Velocicoaster as well as Hulk and Seuss Landing all at one time is just unforgettable. Mythos is easily the best restaurant I've ever been able to experience at a park, and was reasonably priced all around too. Seuss Landing brings you back to your childhood as you step into Dr. Seuss's books. And speaking of jumping into books, you can hop into the comics of Marvel on the left-hand side of the park. Towards the back, you have the always amazing Hogsmeade from Harry Potter and the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World franchises, with my least favorite of the areas being Toon Landing for some old-styled cartoons, including Popeye, which I will say, unfortunately, that is my least favorite part of the park, but I think if they gave it a proper touch-up and a repaint, it could be really outstanding again. And speaking of Popeyes, that is easily the most intense raft ride out there. Goodness gracious, you need an extra pair of clothes if you want to ride that thing. And that's something that this park really excels at. Each individual ride, while there's not too many rides all around, to be honest, nearly every single ride there is incredible. Hulk is one of the most intense B&Ms out there. Spider-Man is easily one of my favorite dark rides of all time, with technology that still boggles my mind. Same goes for Forbidden Journey, and even Kong has some amazing animatronics to check out. And of course, let's not forget about the 2 stars of the show, Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure and Velocicoaster. Those are 2 world-class roller coasters with either just amazing theming all around or some of the best thrills you can find in the US. Or heck, why not a bit of both? This park truly feels magical all around. And honestly, my only small critiques is I wish there was a little bit more cohesion and maybe an extra ride or 2. Now at number 1, we're going to be heading to Missouri, specifically Branson, Missouri, for their theme park Silver Dollar City. You might be really perplexed why this park is above Islands of Adventure, and to be honest, I'm not entirely sure, but there's something at this park that I felt that I haven't really felt at any other park outside of maybe Islands of Adventure, Disneyland as a kid, and realistically nowhere else. This entire park takes you back to the 1800s, with the theming giving nods to local history and recreating what it would have been like back then. It is also so unbelievably naturally beautiful here. As you're in the middle of the Ozark Mountains, there is just some unforgettable views with the pretty insane terrain changes. The food here on average is probably the best that I've experienced from restaurant to restaurant. The worst thing I had was a seasonal item, and it was still pretty good, with that barbecue and of course the cinnamon bread, absolutely to die for. This park doesn't just have on average some of the best food out there, but it also has on average some of the best rides. Now in terms of roller coasters specifically, it doesn't have too many compared to other parks, especially on this list, but man oh man, all of them are just incredible. Outlaw Run, one of the best RMCs out there. While shorter, it does definitely pack more of a punch than it should, while still giving a wooden coaster feel. Wildfire, while being a more generic B&M sit-down coaster, offers the best view on a roller coaster in the United States. And then you have weird creations like Thunderation and of course Powder Keg that just seem a little wacky and a little out of place, with the newer Time Traveler, a mock extreme spinning coaster, dropping you out of the station at 90 degrees immediately before sending you through multiple inversions while you're spinning. It is just insane. And that's not mentioning the fact that there are plenty of flat rides and one of the best raft rides in the world with Mystic River Falls. And while last I visited, the original Fire in the Hole was still at the park, instead of just saying goodbye to that ride forever, they built a brand new version of it across the park into an area that works better with the theming overall. Now, I haven't been on that yet, but the fact that the park even thought about doing that is incredible to me. There's also so much entertainment, whether it be outside acts that sing and dance in the front plaza, their house band playing towards the side of the park, the super fun show on the steam train, or even just seeing some masters in their craft and glass blowing adds so much life to this park. The only thing that's a little wacky and hard to get used to is the park's layout, but outside of that, it's a place I can't wait to get back to and hopefully visit at least every other year going forward. But there you have it, my long-winded explanation of my top 10 favorite theme and amusement parks I've been to outside of Southern California. And that means officially that Listmas Day 1 of 2024 is over, and the rest of Listmas is just beginning. So if you're still hanging out on this video, make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, if you want to see more of these lists with special guests and more. But I will say, if you stuck around this long, thank you all so much. I really do appreciate it. But of course, until the next list, we'll see you on the next ride.